All right, good afternoon, everybody, to all webinar attendees. We have about 111 people from different enterprises, institutes of higher education, and fellow colleagues here with us today. A very warm welcome to the 9th Job and Skills Insights webinar on talents in a post-pandemic world, a fresh look at upskilling opportunities for SMEs. I'm Jia Tao, your moderator for today. Together with me is Alicia and Trinette, and we are from Skills Development Division at SkillsFuture Singapore. So what we do at SkillsFuture Singapore is to provide all Singaporeans with the opportunities to develop their potential throughout their lives. We believe that the skills, passion, and contributions of each and every individual Singaporean will drive Singapore's next phase of development towards an advanced economy and a more inclusive society. Regardless of what point you are at your life, you can be sure to find a variety of resources to help you attain skills mastery and make informed decisions to expand your skill sets for professional and career development. So before we start, allow me to go through some administrative details. This entire webinar will take about 50 minutes. During the webinar, all attendees are muted by default to prevent electronic feedback and interference. However, you can post your questions anytime by using the Q&A option on your screen. If you see any questions by other attendees that you would also like answered, you can upvote those questions and we can try our best to answer them. If we are unable to answer your question during the live session, please be assured that we will address them after the webinar. The speaker will be speaking for about 30 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. This webinar session will also be recorded and published on my SkillsFuture portal, SkillsFuture Singapore's LinkedIn page and YouTube channel, and the slides will be sent to you via email. All right. Our speaker today is Ms. Christine Liu, Head of Partner Acquisitions at RecruiterPal, a leading recruitment management platform for employers. Christine works closely with employers to craft enterprise solutions for the modern recruiter and actively shares about new technology and trends in the area of recruitment and retention. Today's topic on talents in a post-pandemic world is a timely and pertinent one. COVID-19 completely changed the way we work and live. Never before has so much uncertainty fallen upon governments, enterprises, and people all around the world. As we work towards containing and eventually overcoming this virus, what will set enterprises apart when we emerge from this crisis is whether an enterprise possesses the right talents with the right skill sets to navigate the future of work. Without further ado, let us welcome Christine, who will share some insights and strategies to help enterprises ride out the storm and emerge stronger and more ready for the challenges ahead. Over to you, Christine.
Hi, and very good afternoon to all of you. I'm so glad that you all have actually take out time to for the webinar today. As Jia Tao has mentioned, I'm Christine and I head up the partner acquisitions team at RecruiterPal. So RecruiterPal, we are actually rooted in our mission to empower employers and professional recruiters to connect with great talent seamlessly through our platform. And today we are very happy to work with our partner, SkillsFuture Singapore, to bring you this webinar and mindshare, especially during this particularly trying period. At the start, we would love to hear from the 100 and so of you in terms of your opinion on staff training, because that will really help us in understanding where are the perspectives that are being put in place, because many of you are in a position either as a SME business owner or in a position where you're able to influence what is the staff training options available. So I think there is a poll that will appear on the screen. So we would love to hear from you as we go about the webinar today. So you can actually fill up your preferred option A or option B, and then later towards the mid of the webinar, we will actually go through the results. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about what has happened in the recent weeks, right? So, sorry, my bad. Give me a moment. Sorry. Okay, So these are very unusual times. We often used to hear the phrase digital transformation being bantered around in the past, but there has not been a greater driving force today for digital transformation across the board than the coronavirus pandemic, right? Suddenly, overnight, as economies switch to a halt with a lockdown, or in more familiar terms, a circuit breaker, we find that we are in the midst of a brave new world, where almost instantaneously companies find themselves grappling with a rapidly evolving and changing situation. Some of you may be familiar. We used to split up teams, so then you move on to quickly to staggered hours as part of the business continuity plan. And as of 31st of March, whenever possible, it's actually mandatory for companies to switch to have their workforce working from remotely from home. So things were moving really, really quickly. And we have seen also how this has impacted consumer behavior, right? So amidst the scramble for digital collaboration tools, such as the one that we are in right now, Zoom, right? New rules of actually how we work, live, and even study have emerged. So even how we view toilet paper has also changed in a matter of months, right? But there has been subtler shifts in the consumer behavior, such as the increased willingness to contribute to personal data during the pandemic, which actually led to a historical partnership between the two technological giants, Google and Apple, to work together on contact tracing technology on both Android and iOS platforms for our phones, right? So it is strange because not many months ago, it was that concept as a notion was even unconceivable, because we have deep consumer distrust in how technological giants such as Google or Facebook are handling our personal data, right? But all these have changed as a result of the situation that we are all grappling with, either as an individual or even as a company, right? So having seen such tectonic shifts in the consumer behavior, we also see that how we work have also changed, right? So there was some news yesterday that 80% of the local workforce that was surveyed would actually prefer work from home arrangements even after the circuit breaker has ended. Now, this really begs the question, right? So nobody has actually surveyed the employers, because the employers are also, very occupied trying to make sense out of the situation that they are in. But the question that you would have in mind is, if employees themselves are, changing in terms of their work preferences, how has that translated for the employers? Will they become more comfortable with the concept of remote hiring? And if so, the implications for the workforce or the typical salary person is actually also quite tremendous, because we know for a fact that there have always been mental barriers, whether they are real or otherwise, that has been traditionally held by HR teams or employers in managing remote workforce. It's messy. You don't really know how to break the work into meaningful pieces and then have it all aggregated back to conjure up some products and service offerings for the company, right? So, but during this circuit breaker, and we're still in the midst of it, 2 months actually can make very big shifts in not just consumer behavior, but in terms of hiring behavior. So if that's the case, and it is a irreversible trend, if employers themselves are getting increasingly comfortable with having to manage remote workers, since a majority of us are actually working from home, this could mean that the home ground advantage that we often feel it's available in job competition would actually gradually cease to be an advantage at all, right? So that's something that to be considered, and we actually would love to share with you some of the data from our platform that would be points to a certain trend that we see. So we know that 2020 really have broken all expectations this year, And in terms of the data that are surfacing from our platform, it paints towards that what a lot of indicators, job or employment data has been coming out this week. So it points to a very a great picture that is a very long and cold, protracted winter. And this doesn't just affect the recruitment, but also for business performance as a whole, because there is a lot of concern about how companies, especially SMEs, would be able to tide through this winter, right? Across the board, based on our data, we see a much lower recruitment activity count. Now, this is probably like sounds like common sense to a lot of you who are managing recruitment at your workplace, or even from the view of a job seeker. This is probably not surprising. Even for the late last year, we have already seen a generally weak sentiment where all the C-suite management teams that have been surveyed around the Asia Pac region have also given the expectation that they are looking towards entering 2020 with an overdue correction and recession. But I guess with the exception of very few people would see that we will be hit with 2020 with a viral pandemic, right? So the uncertainty in the economic situation making employees holding back on recruitment, except for essential services companies that are with us, which are seem to be still hiring in healthy volumes. But when you look under the hood, the types of jobs has also changed during this period of time. But I guess what is perhaps surprising is that the number of unique applications have also dropped during this period of time. So this can be accounted for two main reasons. One is that talents are actually choosing to stay put in their positions. Previously, maybe talents have always been, as a whole, been looking around for possible opportunities or lateral shifts within the industry, or even a total career switch. But with such bad data that's coming out, a lot of people are choosing to stay put when possible, right, within their organization. So that's one, waiting for the storm to pass. And the hesitation to join a new organization. Now that's something that is also points to a new normal, right? Because if you were to take up a new position today, you might not have the comfort of a physical onboarding procedure, because due to the lockdown, if you turn up for a job, you have no office to report to and no colleagues to meet in person, right? So that being said, those that are in the job market hunting for jobs, there's actually an increase in the intent to apply, which basically means that job seekers are much more motivated to apply for multiple job opportunities during this period of time, and they're much more open towards shifts that are or job positions that may be under deployment of their skill sets. So that's something that we have seen. This period of time, unfortunately, is very different. Like we mentioned in previous years, this period of time is actually a very busy one, because that's when the musical chairs will start and people will start changing jobs. The graduates will start entering the workforce in large droves. But then again, 2020 is not like any other year. So, for the organizations that actually have the capacity to hire, this is actually a very good time to get the positions filled, because there is a lot lesser competition for talent, and you see that the job seeker landscape is actually a lot more motivated. As a broadly speaking, job seekers are much more intent in securing a position, and they are much more motivated to consider positions that they previously might not be so open towards. So of course, we also see that there is an uptick, decided uptick in contract hiring. And now again, this is across organizations, both large and small. And we see that just like how companies have magically, almost automatically adapted to working from home, organizations are also increasingly agile and adapt in making changes to their workforce composite. And the use of contract hires not only reflects the cautious attitude in the midst of what we think is a protracted recession, but more importantly, it's a tactical strategy to make one of the largest operational cost factor, which is manpower cost, flexible to the operational demands of the company, which can be unpredictable in the months to come, as companies are still grappling with the aftermath, of the pandemic, right? So that's something to bear in mind. So in terms of trend predictions, we do believe that there is actually a talent rush when companies enter the recovery phase. Now, this may fly counter, right, to what you have seen in terms of the labor stats that came out this week. So Singapore, like as a whole, the total employment have actually plunged in the first quarter of this year. So, and this is notably the sharpest drop since SARS in 2003. So that's 17 years ago, close to 2 decades. And this, according to Ministry of Manpower, comes with a very solemn note, which is that these stats that they are sharing are only reflective of the early impact of COVID-19. So, there is a lot more that is expected to come in terms of the adverse impact of the virus on employment that will probably come out in the numbers for second quarter. So that being said, right, the acute prediction that post-pandemic, there will be a big shakeup in terms of businesses. Why we think that there is a talent crunch is because companies that have picked themselves up from the dust will need to recruit actively to expand their operations, because they are emerging as the winners of the post-recession. They're picking up from the market share that their competitors that unfortunately did not survive. They have to expand into their market share, and one of the driving force for growth in organizations always is preceded by talents. So you will need to get talents, and of course it's not uniform across the board. So we always encourage our employers to not go headbutt into the competition when everybody else is hiring busily, but actually really to get a head start by taking the downtime during this period of time to prepare for your workforce to be more resilient, and to also to be able to adapt into the new normal. So the question that we always, that might be on your minds as a business owner or even as a HR team member is, how do you make your organization get a head start, right? In terms of how do you create a winning team that can handle the problems post-pandemic in a recovery, and think of novel situations or novel solutions that can take the company forward. And one of the ways that we always talk about is to actually look at what are some of the skill sets that were valued by employers, right? And a lot of times, we always love to quote Warren Buffett when it comes to investment strategies in company, where be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful, right? So this investment strategy paid off very well when it comes to investing in companies. But if you look at things, closely, this strategy can also work very well for talents, right? So when in a time when people are fearful, people are drawing back from finding and investing in talents, it will serve your company well to go the extra mile and look to upskill your workforce, right? As a first practical step, you might find it useful to take stock on the talents that you have in the organization and the skills inventory that you have. But what do employers in Singapore value? Yeah, so based on the data that we have taken from the late second half of 2019, based on the thousands of job postings that were available to us, these are the top 10 skills that surfaced, right? So one thing that you might notice about the skill sets that are popular or in demand is that they are soft skills. They are not the typical hard technical skills, competencies that you would typically expect, normally in a job requirement. And this is a stark revelation that as technology continues to disrupt our life and the way that we work, since pandemic, of course, the impact of unforeseen circumstances, the value of soft skills continue to rise. Like things like the ability to communicate effectively, the ability to lead and collaborate in a workplace actually increases in value over time, as these skill sets are not easily replaceable by AI, robots, or automation. So in terms of getting started, right? So one of the things that we often expound is talent mapping. So how should one actually go about understanding the skills that your talents have in an organization? So one quick way that you can take advantage of is to make use of our platform at RecruiterPal. This is available for free and for employers at this period of time, because we understand that it's a very difficult period for a lot of the businesses. So the platform, you can log in for free as an employer. And what happens is that if you were to key in the job titles available in your organization, what we do is to leverage on the extensive work done by Skills Future Singapore for National Skills Framework, and we pull out for you in real time the skills and the proficiency levels that are corresponding with the job title that you have keyed in. And so this is in real time, and you can find out what are some of the skill sets that your talents would likely possess if they are in that particular job title or job role. And of course, you can then, if you're in the midst of doing a job transition planning exercise, right? So the next thing that you will need to do is for the job roles that are actually made obsolete by macro factors, you can actually look towards whether these workforce, which are currently employed by you in these roles, are they able to transit? Do they have the skill set to transit to the new roles? Again, you can always key in the job titles of the new roles that you are hoping to acquire in your organization, and then find out what's the delta when you put the 2 and 2 together, right? Because that gives you a very good indication in terms of planning. What are some of the skill sets that you should invest in moving forward to enable the person to successfully transit from the current role, which may be made obsolete in the near future, to the new role that you are requisitioning for. Okay. So earlier we had a short poll, and I think for Alicia, we would love to publish the results to figure out, what our audience are thinking when it comes to upskilling the workforce. And wow, we have a split vote. So, we have 41% of the team here that are going for option A, right? We should send our workforce to brush up on technical competencies. And 59% of them thinks that we should educate our workforce towards broad-based learning. Okay, so, maybe we can actually touch base a lot more about our recommendation. There is a concept that we would love to share with the audience that we have today. So I hope many of you are familiar with Gilbert, a comic strip that's centered on workplace parody, right? So Scott Adams is actually the cartoonist and creator behind Gilbert, and he has actually been credited for creating the Gilbert principle, which was very well articulated by Gilbert's talking pet dog, Bird. So if you're familiar with the comic strip, this is a very hilarious principle. But in recent years, Scott Adams has also introduced a very useful business concept known as skill stacking. Now, this concept is really simple and straightforward, but the implications are huge. And this is perhaps best explained through this graph. So, in this graph, each peak that you see actually represents a skill set. So for any given skill, a lot of people, as represented in the blue zone, have very little of a specific skill, but just doing a little bit of the work can quickly get you to the green zone, which is the top 10% of the skill, right? So in terms of efforts, that's a quick win, right? But what about if you want to become the top 1%, right? You will find that it becomes harder and harder to move up because you are facing a lot of competitors which are also very deeply committed to that skill set, right? So what we are trying to say is that it will become exponentially difficult to become the best in the world for that one skill. and because there will always be people who are working harder with more greater genetic gifts, luck, or even both, right? So to be the best at one thing isn't probably the smartest and most efficient path to success, but that's a hackish way of getting to the top, right? So in terms of skill stacking, it's the concept that it is far more effective and far more rewarding to be the top 10% of a skill set, but for several skills. So the skills should be ideally unique and yet complementary. So, you know, in terms of your stack, you are building a stack of skill sets that allows you to be very unique as a talent, that other people wouldn't be able to have the same combination of skill stacks as you. So numerically speaking, if you are in the top 10% for 10 skills, in a population of 8 billion people, you are easily the best in the world. So that's how you know, skill stacking work. And the principle is actually very well illustrated in several notable examples like Steve Jobs, right? So Steve Jobs, would you consider him a world-class designer? Not really, because at the heart of Steve Jobs' skill stack is his passion for design, be it the fonts, you know, how the packaging look in terms of the architecture. He had a very obsessive, you know, passion for the look and feel of products, but he's not the best in the world in design. So that's the key, right? But his acute understanding of design principles, together with the deep insight about what people want, the technological knowledge, when he combines them together, there is the ability to, you know, succeed as, you know, one of the most profitable companies in the world, right? So that's something to think about in terms of skill stacking. In the world that we operate today, you know, one of the you know, New York Times bestseller author, David Epstein, in his book Range, also expounds on the benefits of being a polymath, or what we call as someone with wide knowledge or learning. Right? He argues that, you know, because we are operating in a very wicked learning environment today, where the patterns, you know, or problems are actually harder to discern, and the feedback of your actions, of your learning is often delayed, not available, or even inaccurate, right? So in terms of being a specialist, it will yield you far fewer rewards today than you know, what it was in the past. So in terms of the area of specialization, if you spend all your time in that singular area of specialization, what happens is that if your area of specialization is disrupted or made obsolete, then, you know, your efforts, you know, would be very much like putting all your eggs in one single basket. So skill stacking actually, you know, points to the mindset that helps you and your organizational workforce to build immunity by exposing them to a range of skill sets that may seemingly not be very useful on its own, but when stacked together, allows the person to be uniquely combined as a talent and be able to see problems from a lens that are very special or very specialized, and be able to resolve problems that other people would not have come to the same conclusion, right? So this is actually also very typified in you know, an experiment known as the Dunker's radiation problem. That this was conducted you know, across several groups of you know, experimental subjects, people who are in the medical profession, appears to actually be performed very poorly when it comes to this problem, which is relating to a medical problem with regards to a tumor. So what was interesting about this problem is that when you are a specialist in your field, you tend to be blinded by what your industry, what your experience have shown you. So experience in this case actually turned out to be a disadvantage to you in solving the problem. What they found to be really beneficial for people who are trying to solve the problems, and people who are able to solve the problem very quickly and efficiently, are people who are able to be offered analogies in a different nature. So in this example, like where it comes to a tumor and X-rays, you know, experimental subjects that were given another analogy about how a village chief managed to resolve a fire at a woodshed was actually very intensely helpful in helping them to solve this radiation problem. So what this experiment looks to point out is innovation often these days can be spurred by looking at examples outside of your domain and industries, and that the specialization in your industry could actually hinder you from coming up with creative solutions that are much needed in a very disruptive and a very fast changing environment that we operate in today. So, you know, we often talk about an all-star team. The way we look at it is more towards, you know, getting a deep dive into the talent composite. What are some of the skills that your, you know, the people in the team bring to the table? And, you know, in terms of that aspect, you can do a quick startup plan to create an innovative and creative workforce by first understanding the talent skills inventory. That means having a talent mapping strategy. So take stock of what's available in your organization, figure out what do you need to move the organization forward. Try to imbue your you know, workforce with the analogous thinking concept. Put them together in teams with different domain specialization, very much akin to, you know, setting up a task force. You bring people across different domains because they bring to the table very different lens, right? And of course, you know, a lot of times that process may feel a little bit inefficient, right? Because, you know, I know best about this problem. I've been working at it in my work domain for a long time. So ideally, I should be the best person to solve the problem. But, you know, as the experimental studies have shown, actually innovations require exploration outside of the domain in order to reach very good outcomes. And so the inefficiency at the start, bringing different or diverse teams together, will be well compensated in terms of the payoff when you are able to find novel you know, solutions. So we often like to give example. So in terms of talent composite, we see that happening, you know, interestingly in the fashion industry. So from the tech side, you have seen, you know, like CEOs like Angela Ahrendts from the ex-CEO of Burberry joining Apple, right, in terms of their fashion tech. So they are leading the fashion tech industry. And they bring to them why the technological industry, you know, giants such as Apple are valuing people outside of their domain expertise, which is in technology, and to bring in fashion houses, icons like Angela Ahrendts or Paul Denis from, you know, YSL to them is because they contribute a different sort of lens. Likewise, in Singapore, we can point to a very interesting example from the Textile and Fashion Federation, where we work together with them, and their CEO is actually somebody who came from the tech industry. And you can also see that the talents that come under you know, the Textile and Fashion Federation yield from, you know, anybody from technological expertise, from mass multimedia comms, and they actually have a slant towards bringing the fashion retailers and designers towards e-commerce, looking at manufacturing, supply chain, 3D printing, and so on. They even imbued the concept of that's very familiar to the tech space, like hackathons, incubation space, and introduce it to the fashion industry. So that's how innovations are usually started, and is more often than not spearheaded by teams of people who look at the same problem differently, right? So, you know, we often say that crisis is bad, right? So a lot of times it can look like that's the end, right? You know, a painful, you know, what looks like a painful ending could actually be a beautiful beginning. So in terms of this quote that I would like to end off the session with is from Bill Gore. You might not be familiar with him because he's an engineer and he's a very low profile, but you will definitely have come into contact with his product, which is Gore-Tex. You know, the waterproofing layer on your clothes, on your shoes, and so on, right? So he defines crisis as the best way to innovate, because that's when organization will throw out the rules, they will take risks, they will organize task force. They'll bring different people with seemingly disparate domains of expertise, bring them in and make the big breakthroughs. So that's something that we hope the organizations or even the people who are listening in for our webinar today can also take back in terms of how do you manage and upskill your talents in today's day and age. So in terms of the takeaways, there is a quick summary that we have. All the slides that are available will be sent across to you as well, as mentioned by Jia Tao at the start of the presentation. You know, one of the things that we hope the companies can take back is that to prepare for the talent crunch ahead of recovery. So in the best companies, the ones that manage to survive based on empirical research from the past recessions, are often the ones that invested and doubled down on their talents. You know, the ones that actually didn't do so well are the ones that actually lay off their staff. Of course, they have quick wins in terms of the cost efficiency, but the ramifications are very long term in terms of the profitability of the company over the years, if they even survive the recession at all. Right? The second thing is actually, if you have decided as an organization that yes, I want to invest in my people, then how do I get started? So, you know, inaction is also equally bad as remaining status quo. So what we would encourage you to do is to start with something simple. Something simple as a talent mapping exercise. Make use of the National Skills Framework to quickly pull out the skills and proficiencies of the existing roles. Find and map that across with new roles that you think are relevant in your organization, and try to see whether you can help your existing workforce to transit to these new roles, and what are some of the skills therefore that is required, and you will send them for training in those areas. Yeah, and last but not least, we know we tend to think that a lot of, based on the data that we have received, a lot of the companies would tend to, you know, specialize or put their workforce in a specialized columns in silos. So if you are, you know, a specialist in finance or accounting area, then I would train you only in that area. But I think increasingly we find that to make your teams a winning one, it actually helps if you invest in getting them to learn about things outside of their domain, so that they can pick up diverse skill set. It not only makes them more valuable in the talent landscape, but it also pays off in terms of getting a team that's able to think diversely and creatively for your organization, which is much required for companies that are looking for a way out in a very difficult situation such as the one that we have. So I think that's all we wanted to share. So
all right, thank you, Christine.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the great sharing on upskilling opportunities for SMEs. We will now move on to the question and answer segment. We've got a few questions for you actually. Now, the first one maybe from Benjamin and from Dixon. They're asking whether or not that skills of value are now moving, you know, towards softer skills rather than hard skills. So does that mean that technical skills are no longer valued by employers?
Okay, that's a very good question. Yes, and I would say that, you know, based on the data, although the majority of the skill sets, you know, are pointing towards soft skill, it doesn't mean that the technical skill sets are not being valued, because in a sense, you know, talents composite is a very complex question. Pointing out the top 10 skill sets tells you on what is most valuable. If you were to invest as a job seeker in your own learning pathways, then some of the soft skills that if you think that you are not that good in, it actually pays off to invest in those courses to pick up on those skill sets. But it doesn't mean that technical competencies are not valued. So I hope that you know, addresses that misconception.
Right, thank you. So then with this COVID-19 pandemic, right, because it's really unlike any previous crisis that we have encountered, you know, like the global financial crisis, SARS, you know, it's really a combination of financial, economical, social, labor, even, you know, political tension and all, right? So do you think that employers will change their mindset and or even work processes might just change even after the pandemic. So, for example, do we see that people will work from home like more permanently, or do you think employers can consider employing more senior workers?
Okay. I think, in terms of what employers are thinking, yeah, we are very, very interested because, we are an employer-centric platform. And based on what we can see, what is happening in terms of shifts in the consumer behavior will also definitely have an impact. So if, as an employer, for example, if you having seen the news that came out yesterday that, a lot of people would prefer work from home arrangements, if you are trying to come off as a choice employer, providing that option could be actually an advantage, right? So instead of saying that, hey, we have this great dental or medical perks, and now you say, oh, plus we allow you to work from home, flexible work arrangement is the hallmark, and we encourage it, and that could actually attract for you actually a very diverse workforce that are interested to maintain this sort of work-life balance even post the circuit breaker. So that's something that I would see employers trying to adapt to. So in order to get the best talents, because we are all not clamoring for quantity, right? So it's always about getting the best talents that can help the organization to grow. So if it means providing changes in the way they work, offering flexible working arrangement, that would be something that would be definitely considered by the employers. With regards to the second bit about whether companies would then look towards hiring older workers, it really depends on how the older workers are able to also put across in terms of their skill set, like what is being valued by the employers. So are you, based on the work experience that you've accumulated, able to help them solve and navigate effectively out of this conundrum or this pandemic that is happening? And that will be richly rewarded. Whatever talents that is being brought into the workforce should be actively looking at resolving the very issues that businesses are grappling with.
Right. So it's more about solving the problems for the organization. It's the value that they bring rather than the age, right? In that
Exactly.
sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we have also questions related to the statistics that you have brought up. So we want to understand whether the statistics are based on applications and jobs in Singapore versus regional, global, and whether is it across industries, specific industry, and whether is it from Q1 this year or when are the data when is it from?
You mean from the skill sets or in terms of the recruitment activity?
The skill set and the hiring trends perspective.
Okay. So for the skill sets, these are taken from the second half of 2019, and it cuts across all industries. What happens is that because we support 1,400 employees across the board, the job postings are predominantly in Singapore, but they do have operations. Many of our employers do have operations around the Asia Pacific region. So that's in terms of the indication of how relevant it is, I would say that it is very much mirrored across the region what's happening right now. Although in Singapore, I would say that the skill sets are very unique in the sense that a lot of the other neighboring regions, the demand for skilled labor may be slightly differentiated from Singapore. In Singapore, a huge component of our workforce are primarily in skilled labor. So in terms of the skill sets that we are representing here, this has already been classified or taken out specifically for the Singapore context.
Right. So we also want to ask whether it's a specialization versus generalization, and there's a skill stacking concept that is very insightful. But how do employers then inspire and reward and recognize employees who actually look towards building this kind of the 10% that they have, right?
Yes, and I think that is really a very, very good question, because it shows that employers are progressive in terms of being equally vested in the employees' well-being and development. And I think there are many studies that talk about not just millennials, but even the workforce in general are moving towards employers that are able to afford them the opportunities to grow. Even within their existing work role, it's not something that they foresee will be what they are doing for the next 10 or 20 years. So what they are looking for is the ability to grow personally and also professionally. So having that mindset, putting on that cap and say, okay, knowing what my employees want, I will want to help them to get a greater clarity by doing the talent mapping, and then saying that, hey, we have a plan for you. This is the career path that you could look at if you were to vest your career journey with us. And this is how we see that you can grow. And actively suggest to them to look out for courses or even learning opportunities. It could be something as simple as making them work on a project that sits outside of their domain, like putting up a task force and putting them and say, hey, you can grow if you are part of the lead, you are the appointed leader, and manage a group of people that are different from you, could be very different ages and very different domains, and see how you manage that. So that's very practical, and employees who are given the opportunities will also feel that this is a way of helping the companies to groom talent internally, right? So I think that's really a very good concept to get started on. Yeah, and making sure that your employees know that this was done specifically to, in mind of your personal development. Yeah.
Right. So following the situation, if demand is going to be lower than supply, would that mean that hiring costs will be lower by by a certain percentage, 20-30%? And if the company needs to have employees take a pay cut, or even cut their staff size or staff strength, what do you think is the impact for them?
Impact for the companies or for the job seekers?
I think for the companies also, right? If the company need to pay, do a pay cut, or to cut their staff strength in this climate.
Yes, there are several factors that companies really need to take into consideration. One of which is like what we shared earlier in the empirical studies on companies that made it post-recession, right? One of the major reasons why companies that sought to cost cut largely by cutting manpower, because it's a huge component of the operational cost, and it's a very quick way to reap the returns immediately, is that the ramifications on staff morale, people who are left behind, a lot of their colleagues are like removed or fired or retrenched. The morale has actually to be taken into account. The impact of it could actually cause the demise of the company. So in a certain way, companies have to be very cognizant that it's not just as simple as slicing away the manpower cost, and the impact of it could actually be much longer driven, because you might be left with a workforce that are very demoralized and they are not motivated to continue. If they are always preoccupied with, maybe I'm next on the chopping board, then they won't be in a best position to think about how to keep the company surviving and even thriving, what kind of new solution, which is very much needed today, right? So the companies that tend to do very well, are the ones who says that, okay, we know that we need to take some cuts here and there, but we also need to be largely operationally efficient. And if we are going to make it very clear, some of the principles are, that are universally accepted, is that you must make sure that the team is very transparent about some of the measures and they are taking and how it impacts their livelihoods. So, it's about creating a very safe environment for the workers, so that they know what's coming and how the company is working very hard alongside with them to make sure that as much as possible, they are able to safeguard their livelihoods.
Right, maybe we have time for about the last two questions. One question from William is whether RecruiterPal as a company, right, because you are a service provider, what are some of the actions that you have considered, for the post-crisis situation? Would you be able to share with us?
Okay, very good. Yeah, so of course we understand that what is immediate. What we have done is actually, of course, in the earlier presentation we talk about as a paid service, we have often powered a lot of our employers in recruitment processes. In this period of time, we do find that a lot of the recruitment processes are actually stopped because of uncertain demand in the manpower space. So what we did is that for companies that actually have the capacity to hire, we actually empower them with a free system so that they can pledge a job and help to safeguard livelihoods for people who have been displaced from companies who unfortunately wasn't able to keep these manpower, right? So that's one way. Post-crisis, of course, if you're talking about talent crunch, which we anticipate, then it's about how we can actually enable our employers to better identify talents, right? Because, in terms of skilled labor force, we are never talking about quantity. It's about how, in the midst of a lot of application, the application volume, make no mistake, right? It will actually be very big post-crisis because there is a anticipation that there will be a lot of unemployment. So, amidst the low volume of jobs, you could have, a lot of application, but it doesn't occlude the fact that talents the good ones are going to be always in rare supply, and very much so in a post-pandemic recovery phase. So how are we going to help companies to identify these talents will be the most immediate thing that we'll be providing as a service.
Right. So the last question is, related to your previous question. So, post-crisis, right? Other than mapping existing skills and finding gaps and plugging them, right? What kind of career advice do you think education institutes or even your current employer can help, in help for you to plan your future job role, whether or not you stay in your current employment?
So we'll break it down into the different stakeholders, right? So for academic institutions, this is a very good time, right? This is a very good time to think about how the efforts of the academic institution will have downstream impact on the workforce. How are you able to create a workforce ready talents through courses? And a lot of that times we are already seeing shifts in the academic institutions whereby they are looking at micro learning modules, something that can be easily picked up, and it could be a small snippet in understanding about design, and then coupled with understanding about business development. And then when you combine the two together, again, it's a demonstration of skill stacking. By combining these micro modules, they are able to equip a person with a very wide range perspective, rather than to go through a very long curriculum only on equipping the person with one single specialization. So that's one immediate change for academic institutions that we think will be very helpful in getting people started on the mindset of skill stacking, right? For companies, it's really about getting started on talent mapping, understanding, taking stock of the skill set that you have within your talents, and having a conversation to tell them that, hey, we are equally vested in you. If you do well, in terms of being equipped with the right skill sets, you will be able to drive our organization forward. So the fates are intertwined, right, between the talents and the company. So, investing and making that conversation, investing time to make that conversation clear, and getting the talent to think hard about what are their interests, right? Maybe it could lie outside of what the company is able to offer, and then whether that will mean that the company also can pivot into a product or service offering that some of their talents have been dabbling with in their free time. So that's the kind of gaps where innovation would happen.
All right, thank you very much, Christine. So we've come to the end of the webinar session on how to discover the upside and opportunities in upskilling your workforce during this downtime. We're very grateful to have Christine once again join us in this afternoon to share her insights and address some of the questions that we have. To all the webinar attendees, I hope you have had good takeaways from this session. We also like to encourage you to join us in our subsequent webinars, as we'll be sharing on different topics every month. Right? We will appreciate it greatly if you could also share with us your thoughts on the topics you would like to talk about. And before we close, I'd like to invite you to take a 2-minute survey. Your feedback, which will be kept confidential, will be very important for us to improve our future webinars to serve you better. If you're interested to find out about the initiatives that SkillsFuture has, please refer to the link to the enterprise portal for jobs and skills on the screen. Today's webinar session will be hosted on my SkillsFuture portal, SSG's LinkedIn page, and our YouTube channel. The slides will also be sent to you by email in the next few days. Once again, my name is Jia Tao, and together with Alicia and Trinette, we want to thank Christine once again and the RecruiterPal team for their support. So meanwhile, stay safe and healthy, everybody. See you soon.